William Marshall ran in the same park every morning, following a routine that felt more mechanical than enjoyable. He appreciated the silence of the early hours when the world was still slowly waking up. The rhythmic sound of his sneakers against the ground echoed along the tree-lined paths. The cold winter wind brushed against his face, a stark reminder of his solitude, an ever-present companion, as constant as his financial success. That morning seemed no different from any other until a child's voice broke the calm. "You're the man in the picture." William stopped abruptly and looked around, puzzled. A small girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, stood a few feet away. Her blonde hair was tied into 2 braids, and her eyes sparkled with innocent curiosity. "Excuse me," he asked, furrowing his brow in confusion. "In my dad's wallet," she continued, walking toward him without hesitation. "I saw your picture there. You're the man in the picture." William opened his mouth to respond but found no words. Who was this girl, and why would he be in her father's wallet? Intrigued and a bit unsettled, he crouched down to her level. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his tone calm. "Ava," she replied, smiling. "My dad said you know each other. You look just like the picture, except with more—" She paused, studying him with a child's serious expression. "More wrinkles." The unexpected remark drew a brief, involuntary laugh from William, something rare in his otherwise reserved routine. Still curious, he asked, "And where is your dad now?" Ava pointed toward a cluster of modest houses next to the park. William hesitated. He didn't have time for casual interactions and usually avoided engaging with strangers. Yet there was something disarming about Ava's pure gaze and her mention of that photo. Against his better judgment, he followed the girl. The houses were simple but well kept, with small, tidy gardens. Ava opened the gate to one and led him to the door. She entered without hesitation, leaving William standing on the threshold, unsure of what to do. "Daddy!" Ava called out. "The man from your picture is here." The silence inside the house was replaced by the sound of slow footsteps. A man appeared in the doorway and William felt the ground shift beneath him. It was Charles. His brother's face was more aged and worn, but there was no mistaking him. The last time they had seen each other 10 years ago, they had exchanged harsh words, severing an already strained relationship. The unexpected reunion left them both silent for several moments, simply staring at each other. "William," Charles finally said, his voice rough and heavy with surprise, "what are you doing here?" William began, but his voice faltered. He pointed toward Ava. "Your daughter found me. She said she recognized me from a photo." Charles sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "Come in," he said, opening the door wider. "I guess we have a lot to talk about." The living room was modest, furnished with older pieces, but there was a sense of warmth in the space. Ava ran off to grab a drawing pad, blissfully unaware of the tension building between the adults. William sat stiffly on the couch, unable to relax, while Charles took the chair across from him. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," Charles began bluntly. "Neither did I," William replied. He glanced around the room, trying to gather his thoughts. "Why do you have a picture of me in your wallet? After everything—" Charles was silent for a moment, as though carefully weighing his words. "Despite everything, you're still my brother, and Ava deserves to know she has family, even if it's far away." William felt a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying until that moment. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of Ava's pencil scratching against paper. "She's beautiful," William said, breaking the quiet, nodding toward the little girl. Charles smiled for the first time, a small, melancholic smile. "She's the only good thing I have left. After her mom passed—" He paused, taking a deep breath. "I've lost a lot, William, including you." The older brother felt a pang of guilt pierce him. He had chosen to walk away, immersing himself in his luxurious life, leaving Charles behind. Now, looking at Ava, he wondered if he had made the right choice. "Maybe it's time to change that," William said, more to himself than to Charles. Charles looked at him, surprised, but said nothing. However, the glimmer of hope in his eyes showed that William's words had struck a chord. That morning, William left that house as a different man than the one who had entered. Something had shifted within him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. William walked back through the park, his thoughts swirling in a storm. Ava's face, her innocent energy, Charles's tired expression, everything seemed etched into his mind. He tried to focus on his running pace but couldn't. The visit to his brother's house had unleashed an avalanche of buried memories and questions he wasn't sure he was ready to face. For the past 10 years, he had justified the distance with excuses, conflicting schedules, different priorities, incompatible lives. But now all of that felt like a series of weak justifications. The harder truth was this: he had chosen isolation. And that choice now weighed on him in a way it never had before. When he reached his mansion, the contrast between the two realities was stark. The automatic gate opened to reveal a meticulously maintained garden, but it was empty. The grand entryway, with its sweeping staircase and crystal chandeliers, felt colder and more distant than ever. Everything was in order, but it lacked life, like a painting without a soul. William climbed the stairs to his office and settled into his leather chair, facing a panoramic view of the city. He gazed out at the skyline, but his mind was fixed on Charles's modest living room, with its old furniture, and the warmth his house had never known. He thought of Ava and the genuine smile she carried, even while living in such simple circumstances. A low sound broke his thoughts, a notification on his phone. He picked it up and saw a message from his assistant, reminding him of a business meeting scheduled for late that morning. A multi-million-dollar deal was about to be finalized, something he would normally prioritize without hesitation. But in that moment, it all felt distant, almost insignificant. He set the phone down on the desk and leaned back, closing his eyes. Charles's face kept surfacing in his mind. He looked different, not just older, but also more fragile. William couldn't help but think about what his brother had endured, losing his wife, raising Ava, and seemingly confronting his own struggles. Despite it all, there was something about Charles's demeanor that suggested he still carried many scars. William opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and decided he couldn't ignore the situation. He knew re-entering Charles's life would be complicated. The resentment between them ran deep, built over years of misunderstandings and poor choices. But now he felt an urgent need to try and mend what was broken. Back at the park, Charles watched Ava as she played with other children in the playground. He was still processing his brother's unexpected visit. William's presence had stirred conflicting emotions: nostalgia, anger, and a reluctant hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild something. When Ava ran up to him, clutching a drawing she had just made, Charles hugged her tightly. "Daddy, is Uncle William coming back?" she asked, tilting her head to look at him. "I don't know, Ava," he replied honestly, "but maybe he will." And for the first time in many years, Charles felt that perhaps there was a way back. As William left Charles's modest house, a knot formed in his stomach, something he couldn't ignore. The image of Ava sitting on the rug with her drawing pad and Charles's weary gaze lingered in his mind as he walked back through the park. He tried to focus on the scenery around him, on the cold wind stirring the branches, but his thoughts were trapped in a whirlwind of emotions. When he reached his mansion, the contrast hit him hard. The grand entryway, the carefully curated artwork on the walls, the deafening silence. Everything felt emptier than ever. He dropped his keys on a nearby table and headed to the bar, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. Taking a sip, he couldn't avoid the question that loomed in his mind. How did I end up here? He had everything he'd ever wanted, but now for the first time it felt like everything wasn't enough. Across the city, Charles was equally lost in thought. Ava had returned to her drawing, carefree, while he stared at an old leather wallet on the table. Inside it was a faded photo of William, worn from years of being carried around but still recognizable. He had kept it longer than he cared to admit, as a reminder of better times, or perhaps as a symbol of something he didn't want to lose entirely. "Daddy?" Ava's voice broke through his thoughts. "Is Uncle William coming back?" Charles looked up, surprised. "Why do you think that, sweetie?" Ava shrugged, still focused on her drawing. "He looked sad, but in a good way, like when you miss something and then find it. I think he wanted to stay longer." Ava's honesty struck Charles in a way he wasn't prepared for. He glanced away, swallowing hard. "Maybe he'll come back," he replied, trying to hide the uncertainty in his voice. In the days that followed, William couldn't shake the encounter from his mind. He buried himself in work, but meetings and phone calls felt hollow. The image of Charles, worn but still trying to move forward, reminded him of the time he'd wasted, of the chasm he had built between them. Finally, on Saturday morning, he picked up his phone. His finger hovered over Charles's number, saved in his contacts for years but never dialed. He took a deep breath and pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 times before Charles answered, his voice cautious on the other end. "William?" "Hi, Charles," William said, a bit nervous. "I was thinking, would you and Ava like to have breakfast with me tomorrow? Something simple, just to talk a bit more." There was a pause before Charles replied. "Ava would love that," he said finally. "And I think I would too." William smiled, feeling a relief he didn't realize he needed. "Great. I'll send you the restaurant address. See you tomorrow." The next morning, William arrived at the restaurant a few minutes early. It was a simple, cozy place. Far from the luxury he was used to, he chose a table by the window where the sunlight streamed in softly, creating a welcoming atmosphere. Charles and Ava arrived shortly after. Ava ran to greet William, wrapping her arms around him in a way that caught him off guard. He returned the hug, smiling. Charles, more reserved, shook his brother's hand, but there was something different in his expression. Less suspicion, more hope. The conversation started tentatively, but Ava, with her infectious energy, quickly broke the ice. She shared stories about school, her friends, and even drew a portrait of William on a napkin, earning genuine laughs from both brothers. As they sipped coffee, William observed Charles more closely. He noticed the lines of exhaustion on his brother's face, but also the quiet strength he exuded when talking about Ava. It was clear that despite the hardships, Charles had built something meaningful. And for the first time in a long while, William felt like he might belong in it. When the meal ended, Ava asked if she could see William again. He looked to Charles, who gave a small nod of approval. "Of course, Ava," William replied, feeling a warmth in his chest he hadn't expected. "I'd love to." As they left the restaurant, William knew this was just the beginning. There was much to rebuild, but for the first time in years he was willing to try. In the days following the breakfast, William felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: purpose. Reconnecting with Charles and Ava seemed to have unlocked a door within him, exposing emotions he had buried under years of obsessive work and isolation. One afternoon, while reviewing reports in his mansion's office, his mind wandered to Ava and the innocent sparkle in her eyes when she talked about school. He thought of Charles and the carefully chosen words that revealed the vulnerability of someone who had faced loss and was still fighting to move forward. The contrast with his own life was striking. There was Charles, who had lost so much yet managed to raise a joyful daughter. And here was William, surrounded by luxury, unable to remember the last time he felt genuinely connected to anyone. William stood up, abandoning his work. He picked up his phone and sent a quick message to Charles. "William, are you free this weekend? I was thinking you and Ava could visit my house. She might like the pool." The reply came within minutes. "Charles, she'll love that. But are you sure?" William sighed before typing back. William, "Yes, Charles. I want you both to come." Saturday arrived, bringing a mix of anxiety and anticipation. William spent the morning preparing his house for the visit. Despite having staff on hand, he chose to handle some of the arrangements himself. He wanted Charles and Ava to feel welcome, not like strangers in an impersonal space. When Charles's modest car pulled into the driveway, William was waiting outside. Ava was the first to hop out, running toward him with a beaming smile. "Do you really have a pool?" she asked, nearly bouncing with excitement. William laughed, crouching down to respond. "I do, and it's all ready for you. But how about a tour of the house first?" Charles stepped out of the car next, glancing around with an expression that was hard to read. William noticed his brother's discomfort and quickly approached him with a firm handshake and a welcoming smile. "Glad you're here. Let's head inside." The house was everything William knew would impress Ava. As she explored each room with wide-eyed wonder, Charles moved slowly, taking everything in with cautious curiosity. There was a weight on his shoulders, a mix of admiration and perhaps resentment that William could sense. He decided not to push. He knew rebuilding their relationship would take time, But Ava broke down any remaining barriers. When they reached the pool, she let out a squeal of delight and dashed back inside, returning minutes later with a towel and a swimsuit William had thoughtfully provided. "Can I?" she asked, her eyes pleading. "Of course you can," William said with a smile. As Ava played in the pool, Charles and William sat on nearby chairs, watching her. The silence between them was heavy at first, but gradually Charles began to relax. "Did you do this for her?" Charles asked suddenly, nodding toward the towel and swimsuit. "I did," William admitted. "I wanted her to feel comfortable. And you too." Charles looked at him, visibly surprised. It was rare to hear something like that from his brother. William continued, "I know I haven't been the brother you needed. Honestly, I'm not even sure I'm the right person to be here now. But I want to try. For Ava. For you. And maybe for me too." The words were difficult to say, but they were genuine. Charles was silent for a moment before finally responding. "I'm not going to say it's easy to forget everything that happened, but maybe we can start over." The weight on William's chest seemed to lift, if only slightly. He knew forgiveness wouldn't come overnight, but that moment, that small gesture, was an important step. Ava ran over to them, dripping wet and laughing, interrupting their conversation. "Are you guys coming in? The water's great." Charles laughed for the first time that day, and William felt that for the first time in years, his house felt alive. When Charles and Ava left that evening, William stood alone in the living room, looking out at the pool, reflecting the soft lights of the house. He thought about Ava's laughter, about the less tense expression on Charles's face, and realized that the day had been more than just a reunion. It was a starting point, a glimpse of something he hadn't known he needed. He picked up his phone and began researching ways he could give back, not just to his family but to others as well. Something in his conversation with Charles had sparked a new thought about the impact he could have. As he closed his eyes that night, for the first time in a long while, William felt like he was building something that truly mattered. In the weeks that followed, William made a point to stay in frequent contact with Charles and Ava. He invited them to dinners, park outings, and small gatherings that gradually bridged the emotional gap between the brothers. Ava, with her contagious energy, quickly became a constant, illuminating presence in William's life. With each meeting, he discovered something new about his niece: her passion for drawing, her fascination with stories, and her insatiable curiosity about the world. During one of these visits, Charles casually mentioned the community center in their neighborhood. "Do you remember the old community center?" he asked, watching Ava run across William's manicured lawn. "That place was always important to us as kids." William vaguely recalled the small building where they had spent hours playing ball, doing homework, and making friends. "Of course I remember," he replied. "Is it still running?" Charles laughed, but there was a bitter edge to it. "Running? I don't know if you can call it that. It's barely standing. They can hardly keep the doors open." That conversation stayed with William. For days he pondered Charles's words. The idea of visiting the place began to take shape, a curiosity he couldn't ignore. The following Saturday, without telling anyone, he drove to Charles's neighborhood and found the community center exactly as his brother had described: run down. The walls were peeling, the windows dusty, and the surrounding lawn was little more than hard-packed dirt. A few children kicked a ball around on a makeshift field, while adults sat on worn-out plastic chairs. William parked his car and watched for a few minutes before deciding to go inside. The interior was even more dismal. The main room was almost empty, filled with old furniture and broken equipment scattered around. At a small desk, a woman was organizing papers. She looked exhausted, but when she saw William, she gave him a warm smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. "I'm William Marshall," he said, extending a hand. "I'm visiting the neighborhood and wanted to see the place. It looks like there's a lot that needs to be done here." She chuckled, but there was weariness in her tone. "That's an understatement. I'm Emma, the center's director. We do what we can, but with the budget we have, it's a struggle just to keep the doors open." William glanced around again, trying to imagine the potential the space could have. Children laughing, adults learning new skills, families gathering together. He felt an uncontrollable urge to act. "What if I helped?" he asked directly, catching Emma off guard. "Help?" she repeated, confused. "And what do you mean?" "I can fund the renovations, new equipment, a proper space for the kids, educational programs, whatever it takes to transform this place. I have the resources, and I want to make a real difference." Emma's face lit up with a mix of disbelief and hope. She seemed about to respond when William added, "I just need you to tell me what's most urgent. I want to work with you on this." Emma nodded slowly, as if processing what she had just heard. "Well, Mr. Marshall, if you're serious, we have a lot to discuss." That evening, William told Charles and Ava about his visit to the community center. Charles was surprised by his brother's gesture, but there was a mix of skepticism and admiration in his tone. "Are you really going to do this? This isn't just a whim?" Charles asked as they drank coffee in his kitchen. "No, it's not a whim," William replied earnestly. "I'm tired of living just to accumulate more money. I want to use it for something meaningful. And honestly, after everything that's happened between us, I think this is my chance to make a difference. Not just for you and Ava, but for others too." Charles was silent for a moment before nodding. "In that case, I'm with you." Work on the community center began quickly. William hired architects, engineers, and a construction crew to renovate the building. He also got personally involved, visiting the site regularly to check on progress. During this time, he grew closer to Emma, who was practical, passionate, and full of ideas for the center's future. As they discussed the programs they could implement, William noticed something new in himself. He wasn't just investing money, he was investing time, energy, and heart, something he hadn't done in a long time. Over the months, the community center began to take shape. New rooms were built, programs for youth and seniors were organized, and the neighborhood started to engage more actively. Charles and Ava also got involved, with Charles helping organize events and Ava volunteering in activities with other children. Watching it all unfold, William felt something he couldn't put into words. He was beginning to feel the emptiness that had consumed him for so long, and most importantly, he wasn't doing it alone. Over the months, the renovated community center became the heart of the neighborhood. The walls, once faded and cracked, now displayed vibrant murals painted by local artists. The sports court, previously just a dirt field, was transformed into a modern space with bleachers and proper lighting. Classrooms were equipped with computers, and a small auditorium was built for events and lectures. More than just a physical space, the center came to symbolize a renewed sense of hope for the community. Every day, William felt the impact of his work. Children laughed in the hallways, seniors attended literacy classes, and young adults participated in job training programs. He noticed the light in Ava's eyes as she ran through the center, helping friends and chatting excitedly with Emma. The girl seemed to have found a new purpose there, a reflection of the transformation William himself was experiencing. One afternoon, while William supervised the installation of a library, Emma approached him with a cup of coffee. "Do you have any idea how much this means to these people?" she asked, her warm smile lighting up her face. William accepted the coffee but stayed silent for a moment, looking around. There was something about Emma that made him lower his guard, something rare for a man used to keeping his defenses up. "I think I'm only just beginning to understand," he finally replied. "For so long I only thought about myself. And when you live like that, everything feels empty, even when you have everything." Emma studied him for a moment before responding. "I think sometimes we need to lose our way to find the right path. And it seems like you're finding yours." William smiled, moved by her words. The bond between them had grown over the months, naturally, almost inevitably. Emma was practical, dedicated, and deeply passionate about her work at the center. Her presence had become a constant in William's life, and he felt something new and unexpected blossoming between them. Meanwhile, Charles was also beginning to change. Working alongside William at the center brought back memories of their youth before their paths had diverged. He still carried scars from the past, both emotional and financial, but he was starting to see that his brother was genuinely trying to make amends. One evening, after a long day at the community center, the two brothers sat on the front steps, watching Ava play with other kids. "I never thought I'd see you like this, William," Charles said with a small smile. "It's strange, but good." "Like what?" William asked, curious. "Human," Charles laughed, though there was sincerity in the joke. For so long, you seemed so distant from everything, like money was your only concern. Now I see someone who cares. William nodded, taking in his brother's words. He looked at Ava, who was now helping a younger boy organize pieces for a board game. She reminds me a lot of you, you know, William said, gesturing toward his niece. Always helping, always trying to do the right thing. Charles was silent for a moment, his eyes on his daughter. Ava is my world, William. And I don't know if I could have raised someone so special without help from people like Emma or the community center. That's why I'm glad you're doing this, not just for us, but for so many people who need it. The weight of those words hit William deeply. He realized that more than just helping the community or rebuilding family ties, he was rediscovering himself and finding something money could never buy, meaning. In the months that followed, William, Charles, and Emma continued working together to expand the community center's programs. The foundation created to manage the center began drawing attention from other areas, and soon new projects were sprouting up in neighboring neighborhoods. Ava, always present, became something of a mascot for the project, motivating other children and inspiring adults with her contagious energy. William began to dream of a bigger future for her, something he'd never have imagined before. During the grand opening of a new wing of the center, Emma gave an emotional speech about the impact the project had on the community. When she publicly thanked William, he was visibly moved. As he stepped onto the stage to speak, he looked out at the audience, Charles, Ava, Emma, the children, and the families who were now a part of his life, and felt something he had never experienced so profoundly: belonging. When we started this, I thought I was helping all of you, he said, his voice slightly breaking. But the truth is, you've helped me. You've taught me what truly matters in life, and for that I am eternally grateful. The audience rose to their feet in applause, and William knew in that moment that his journey of transformation was only just beginning. He wasn't just rebuilding his relationship with Charles and Ava, he was creating something that would transcend generations. And for the first time in many years, he felt whole. The community center had become a true symbol of hope. Its doors were always open, welcoming children and young people who found a safe space to learn, play, and dream. Seniors attended computer classes, light exercise programs, and social activities that kept them connected. Entire families now saw the center as an extension of their own homes. William Marshall, who had once lived isolated in a cold mansion, had become a central figure in the community. He wasn't just the millionaire who funded the center, he was present. He participated in workshops, talked with attendees, and actively helped with new initiatives. He mingled with volunteers, always with his sleeves rolled up, showing that his contribution went far beyond money. One day, while walking through the center with Emma and Charles, William stopped to watch a group of children learning programming in one of the newly renovated rooms. Ava was there, patiently explaining something to a younger boy with the clarity and composure of someone much older. "She has the right heart for this, you know," Emma said, watching the scene beside William. "She's a natural leader." William smiled, proud. "She's special, and she has the potential to be even bigger than anything we're building here." Charles, who was listening, chuckled softly. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that. She already has plans to change the world, as she puts it." "Maybe that's exactly what we need right now," William replied, his eyes bright with hope. "More people willing to change the world." Emma glanced at William, noticing something different about him. He seemed lighter, more connected to himself and those around him. It was hard to believe this was the same man who, months ago, had been locked away in a world of luxury and solitude. "And what about you?" she asked, interrupting his thoughts. "Have you thought about what comes next?" William frowned, intrigued. "Next?" "Yes. What happens when this center is running smoothly, when it's no longer about rebuilding but about sustaining?" The question hung in the air. William had never thought that far ahead. His personal transformation had been so intertwined with the revitalization of the center that he hadn't considered an after. But the idea began to take shape in his mind. Maybe we could take this to other places," he said slowly, as if forming the thought aloud. "Create a larger foundation, something that could replicate this model in other communities, not just here but wherever it's needed. Emma smiled, approving of the idea. Charles crossed his arms and nodded. That could really make a difference, William, not just for our community but for so many others. From that day on, William began crafting an ambitious plan. He and Emma worked together to lay the groundwork for a foundation that could expand the center's impact. Emma brought her experience in community management, while William leveraged his business connections to attract donors and sponsors. Charles, who had initially hesitated to get involved, ended up taking on an essential role. His story of personal resilience and his love for his daughter made him an inspiring figure for other parents and families. He attended events, shared his journey, and helped mobilize the community to support the cause. Ava, for her part, found a special place in the project. Even at her young age, she demonstrated a genuine passion for helping others. Her enthusiasm inspired other children to get involved and believe they too could make a difference. Over time, the foundation grew. Other neighborhoods became interested in the success of the center's model, and new partnerships began to form. William, Charles, and Emma traveled to different communities, sharing their experiences and helping build new spaces that could transform lives. One evening, after an inauguration event in a neighboring community, William sat in the garden of his mansion. Emma found him there, sitting quietly, his eyes turned toward the starry sky. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, sitting beside him. William gave a slight smile. "How it all started. If Ava hadn't recognized me that day, my life would be completely different now. It's funny how things happen, isn't it?" Emma nodded in agreement. "Sometimes all we need is a little push, and in your case, a very brave little girl." They both laughed. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with mutual understanding. Emma broke the moment by gently placing her hand on William's arm. "You've found what you were looking for, haven't you?" William looked at her, his eyes reflecting something he was still learning to recognize. "Peace." "Yes, and more than that. I've found who I'm supposed to be." That night, William went to bed feeling fulfilled. The journey was far from over, but he knew he was on the right path, and for the first time, he was certain he wasn't alone. He had Ava, Charles, Emma, and an entire community by his side, and that was more than he could have ever asked for. 20 years had passed since the day William Marshall met Ava in the park. His life, once marked by the solitude and emptiness of a silent mansion, was now rich with meaning. That morning, as the sun softly illuminated the porch of his home, William held a cup of coffee and watched the activity in the large garden surrounding the community center that had become the heart of the neighborhood. The building was the same as where it all began, but now it was part of something much greater. The foundation created by William, Charles, and Emma had expanded, transforming the lives of thousands across numerous communities. What had started as an effort to help a single neighborhood had become a replicable model, bringing vibrant, welcoming community centers to cities far and wide. William spotted Ava in the distance, now a 30-year-old woman, gesturing animatedly as she coordinated a group of volunteers. She had become the natural leader of the foundation, with contagious energy and a clear vision for continuing the work her uncle and father had started. Her hair, tied in a ponytail, bounced as she moved from one task to another, organizing activities for a fundraiser scheduled for that afternoon. "You should be proud," Emma said, approaching William with a warm smile. Her hair now had a few gray strands, but her eyes sparkled just as they had the day they met. William turned to her, a soft smile on his face. "I am. Very," he said, pausing to watch Ava. "When I look at her, I see what we can build when we set aside selfishness and focus on what truly matters." Emma nodded, gently placing a hand on his arm. "You built this, William. But more than that, you gave Ava the tools and the support to keep building." He chuckled, taking a sip of his coffee. "I think she always had that strength in her. She just needed someone to help her find the way." Later that day, during the fundraiser, William stepped onto an outdoor stage. In front of him was a crowd of families, young people, and seniors, all gathered to celebrate the foundation's impact. Ava stood beside him, ready to take the lead for the ceremony, but she had insisted that William say a few words first. He looked out at the audience, recalling the man he had been 2 decades ago. someone trapped in his own bubble, disconnected from anything of real value. Change had seemed like an unattainable dream, but now here he was, surrounded by people whose lives he had touched in some way. 20 years ago, I was a man who thought he had everything, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. But in truth, I had nothing. Everything I achieved felt empty, without purpose. It wasn't until I reconnected with my brother Charles and met Ava that I realized true success isn't about what we accumulate. It's about what we share. He looked at Ava, who smiled proudly. And today, as I pass the torch to the next generation, I see that this is not just about what we've built, but about what will continue. Ava, my niece, is living proof that the future is in good hands. The crowd erupted into applause as Ava took the microphone. My uncle is far too generous with his words, she began, drawing laughter from the audience. But he's right about one thing. This is just the beginning. The work we've started here doesn't belong to one person or one family. It belongs to all of us. Together, we can keep transforming lives and communities. The audience applauded again, and William felt a wave of pride and peace wash over him. That evening, as the event wound down, William wandered through the now quiet community center. The lights were dim and the silence was soothing. He stopped in front of a wall filled with old photos and newspaper clippings that told the story of the foundation. Among them, one black and white photo caught his eye. Himself, Charles, and Ava, taken on the day they reopened the first center. Charles had passed away a few years earlier, but his memory lived on in this place. William felt a lump in his throat, but also a profound sense of gratitude. His brother had been his greatest motivator, the link that had led him to transform his life. Emma appeared beside him, breaking his thoughts. "Are you okay?" she asked, gently touching his hand. William smiled, squeezing her hand lightly. "More than okay. I'm complete." Emma smiled back, and the two stood there in silence, gazing at the photos that told a story of redemption, love, and purpose. Later, back at his home, William sat on his terrace, looking up at the stars. He thought about the long journey he had traveled since that day in the park when Ava had approached him. The road hadn't been easy, but it had been profoundly transformative. He realized that in the end, his true wealth wasn't in his bank accounts or material possessions, but in the relationships he had rebuilt, the lives he had touched, and the legacy he had left for the future. And with that certainty in his heart, William finally felt at peace.